So speech in its correct account must be dialed in correctly. And I've wanted to discuss this 3-step process and how it's related to the action taking place within the Trinity, which is our hemispherical parents, the parents of the left and the right hemisphere of our minds, and how they become the great scribes who have taken everything into account from the beginning until the end. And they link the end within the beginning and the beginning within the end when they finally get to the 3rd step, okay? And that 3rd step is this idea of creating the wind tunnel or the funnel, okay? Which is that channeling or that mercurial energy, right? The mercurial energy is the energy of translating or taking things from one place to another, okay? So transport. So this is why Thoth, which is the masculine version of the scribe, and Hathor, his sister, which would be like the equivalent of the high priestess, okay, is the female version of the twins, which is Gemini or Mercury, right? They have to get to this 3-step process where they materialize their thoughts into the sacral, okay? The sacral is the last step because the sacral is the material, the physical act of going from the preformed ideas, right? The preformed ideas of just thoughts to then communication, which is speech. And that is when the masculine and the feminine hemispheres make contact with each other via speech or communication back and forth. And that is like an idea of exchanging ideas, exchanging thoughts, and exchanging the accounts and working to adjust those counts, to dial them in, to tone them correctly, right? And I've done some research where I put some things together in a collage where I tried to make the connections between dialing in or toning in, the act of like tuning the bells. And the bells are the chakras, okay? The chakras are hardened, crystallized sound that have formed into a body. And that body now becomes resonance that can be tuned by the lighter elements, which are air and fire, okay? The more materialized elements would represent the sacral energy. The sacral energy is the feminine energy, which crystallizes things into, like, it hardens, matter so that you can actually physically see it, or you can physically, exchange with it. Whereas with air, you can't do that. You can only express it via speaking or writing, and then you formalize those thoughts. So it's like it's an air fire kind of elemental action, whereas the physical act is the last act into doing anything, into making anything actually truly happen, right? And this is what I've been missing. Like, obviously something's missing here because we're all still here, right? We haven't gone through that channel to get to 0 point, which is the great, winnowing, where everything gets winnowed back into 0 point to be reworked. And the reason for that, I believe, is because there hasn't been sacral contact between what represents the masculine presence or representation in our reality and the feminine presence. There's a feminine presence and a masculine presence that do this work. And they do it in the preform thought, they do it within speech. And then their last step would be to do it in the sacral form. So these are the 3 chakras that exist within the middle pillar, because you have the sacral, which is the moon, okay? That's the first chakra that everything is invited to channel through, the middle pillar. The second chakra that exists within the middle pillar is the sun, okay? And that's the sacral, that's the heart. That would represent the speech, okay? And then the pineal is the last, okay, chakra that exists within the middle pillar, or the 0 point, which is the gateway between the two, the mother and the father, which is the masculine and the feminine. Okay, that one is thoughts, okay? So the pineal is the thoughts or the preformed ideas, and then speech is whenever you forge it down into speech, right? You forge thoughts down into speech, and then that speech is and it can also be writing too. So you can take writing and speech, and then the two representatives of the ones who are that are scribing and taking account everything, right? They're taking into account everything. They are the witnesses of everything. They have witnessed. The sun and the moon are the witnesses of all the accounts within the tree, which is the Earth's field, and everything that has taken place within it, right? And so, once they do that, then that's the act of communication between the two, okay? But that's still not enough. You have to take it down into the act of the sacral, okay? The sacral is like a physical encounter, a physical something that physically allows for everything to go into effect of action, right? It's the last step in action. You can't have you can't have just one of those three. Even if you can't, like some people think that sacral is enough, right? Sacral is like, like a hug or something physical, right? That's not enough, because if that was the case, then and everybody who does things like as far as like with union or communication or understanding each other, like if you have a really good conversation and you hug afterwards, that's like a confirmation of the physical completion of that understanding, right? It's like the same thing. If that hug would be able to take all of us or translate us, then it would have already happened, right? So it has to have all three components for this to actually take place. And so if one thing is missing, then nothing is going to happen, and that's why we're still here, right? So they have to, the representations in our mind, the inner pillars of our mind that represent the masculine and the feminine forces, have to do these 3 steps in order for this physical event to affect the reality of the plates of the earth. Like the earth will follow suit, right? Because the earth is an exact model. It's an exact tree. The larger tree is the earth's grid. And then we represent a lesser tree or fruit on that tree. So we're like a wheel within a wheel, right? The larger wheel would be the earth's environment, which also comes from the root. And then the lesser tree is our own personal vehicles or ourselves, right? And so in order to affect the larger tree or the earth's tree, the 2 witnesses have to do these 3 steps. And they cannot miss any of these 3 steps. They have to have the correct information. They have to do the work to come up with a correct account, okay? And then actually physically speak it out, okay? So that it becomes an action and not just thoughts, right? Not just something that we keep to ourselves, but something that we are now declaring, or we are pledging out as our work or our action. And so when we do that, that's the second step. But there's a last step that is even more action or more physical than the act of just speaking it out. I feel like I know what that is. At the same time, I feel like I don't know what that is, but I feel like I do know somewhat, right? And so this brings me to the idea of how a lot of ancient societies have taken things like obelisks and things that represent the sacral, right? The obelisk represents 1/2 of the sacral mirror, because that's the masculine's half, right? So a phallus or a false phallus would be like only an earthly, like made like a statue or something like that of like an obelisk, right? And then the yoni would be like the representation of the feminine's sacral, right? And how people used to make these monuments, and they still do today, because they think that by doing that they are they're taking that 3rd step, but they're missing the other 2 steps, because that's just physical. It doesn't have the speech attached to it, and it doesn't have the formulation. It doesn't have the formulation that then became the speech and then communicates with the other side, right? The other side would be the phallus communicating with the sacral on the other side. It's missing, so it's almost like this dead aspect or this incomplete aspect. But it does represent that, right? But it's always going to be incomplete because it's missing the other two components of the pineal and the heart chakra, or the beat, the living energy within it. Now everything has a vibration. Like even that monument or statue, it does have a vibration, but it doesn't have the account, right? It's just simply like vibrating, but it doesn't have the missing component of the account or the correct account, right? That can only happen with the human vessel, okay? Like the human vessel and the human sacral and the human sacral on both sides of the mirror, masculine and feminine, are the correct